A struggling single mother helps a limping old man walk, unaware he is the father of the city's most dangerous mafia boss. Her simple act of kindness becomes the key that unlocks a world of power, danger, and life-altering choices. If you're enjoying this story, go on and hit subscribe button. It keeps the family growing and guarantees you don't miss the next move. Turn on notifications, you'll want to know when the next tale drops. Giovanna could feel exhaustion sitting heavy on her shoulders as she stepped into the dim staff corridor behind the hotel's dining floor. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep and her fingers ached from hours of carrying heavy trays. For weeks she had been running double shifts, hoping to catch up on bills that only seemed to grow stronger teeth. Every time she marked one paid, another two arrived with red stamps and warnings that made her chest tighten. Her daughter's medication was due for refill. The landlord had already given her a final reminder. Her day job barely covered food and utilities, so the night shift had become her survival plan. She told herself she could manage it. She always told herself that. Yet the truth pressed against her ribs. She was crumbling. Still, her little girl's smile kept her moving. In the early morning hours before school, when Giovanna braided her hair and pressed a kiss to her forehead, she remembered why she endured all of it. Her daughter deserved a life that did not taste like fear. That was the promise that carried Giovanna from one sunrise to the next. By evening, she was back at the luxury hotel where she worked as a dining attendant. The chandeliers glowed softly, casting warm light over polished marble floors. She stood at the outdoor dining section, welcoming guests who never looked her in the eye. Mostly wealthy travelers who treated the staff like moving furniture. She was used to it. She needed the job more than she needed respect. Her co-workers drifted around her. Some were friendly, offering small smiles. Others moved with the aim of doing as little as possible. A few whispered gossip about guests, supervisors, and staff they did not like. It was a normal night, or at least it began that way. Across the patio, a figure approached slowly. At first Giovanna assumed it was another guest, but as he drew closer she saw the tremor in his steps. The elderly man gripped a metal cane, though it did little to steady him. His back hunched slightly and his breathing was shallow. When he attempted to lift one leg onto the small platform of the patio, his knee buckled and he stumbled. For a moment no one moved. Staff glanced at each other, unsure whether to help or pretend not to see. A few stepped back, annoyed at the thought of extra work. Giovanna felt her stomach tighten. Something warm flickered in her chest, something she could not ignore. She dropped the towel she had been folding and walked toward him. "Sir, let me help you. Give me your hand," she said softly. His fingers were cold and trembling. She steadied him, guiding him onto the patio and into a cushioned chair. He winced as he sat, the pain etched deep across his face. "Thank you," he whispered, each word strained. She offered a gentle smile. "You are welcome. Let me get you some water." He nodded without lifting his eyes. His hands shook as though holding an invisible weight. She returned with a glass and watched him struggle to steady it. Without hesitation, she helped him lift it to his lips. Most guests would have complained or acted offended, but she saw only a hungry, hurting old man. Something about him reminded her of her father before his illness had taken him. The quiet pride mixed with fading strength. The man barely spoke, only murmuring small thanks as she helped him settle his meal. He ate slowly, watching her with an expression she could not decipher. There was a softness in his eyes, a quiet attention that felt almost fragile. No one else paid him much mind, though she noticed staff deliberately avoiding that side of the patio. They preferred guests who tipped well and complained loudly. They preferred easy work. Giovanna had long learned that people often overlooked those who needed the most help. She checked on him several times. Every time she approached, his eyes lifted as if waiting for her return. There was something heavy in his gaze, a kind of sadness that made her want to speak gently, move slowly, and treat him with a dignity he seemed to have lost somewhere along the way. As she leaned forward to adjust his napkin, she felt a strange shiver crawl up her spine. It was the sense of being watched, a quiet presence lingering beyond the soft glow of the patio lights. She glanced toward the far end of the hotel grounds where shadows collected behind tall potted palms. For a moment she saw movement. A tall figure stood there, barely visible, still as stone. She blinked and the shape melted deeper into darkness. She shook off the feeling and returned her attention to the elderly man. "You have been very kind," he murmured, voice rough with age. "It is nothing," she replied. "You needed help." He studied her with a slow nod, as if committing her face to memory. "Not many people see what you see," he said quietly. His words puzzled her, but before she could ask what he meant, a supervisor called her name from across the patio. She stepped away reluctantly, leaving the old man to rest. The night returned to its usual flow of orders, complaints, and hurried steps. Yet as she worked, her gaze drifted back to the empty chair where the man had been. At some point, he had slipped away without her noticing. Not even the busboy had seen him leave. Her shift ended close to midnight. Giovanna gathered her things and trudged toward the small staff exit. Her feet throbbed with every step. She wondered if she would have enough energy to walk home. The air outside was cool and sharp. She pulled her jacket tighter around her body and began the journey down the quiet street toward the bus stop. Her mind replayed the image of the frail man. The way his eyes had followed her. The tremble in his hands. She hoped he had somewhere safe to go. She hoped he had someone to look after him. Her life felt like a long stretch of giving more than she ever received, yet moments like that made her feel human. Even when she had nothing, she could give compassion. It was the only thing no one could take from her. She reached her small apartment an hour later. Her daughter was asleep in the narrow bed they shared. Giovanna wrapped her arms around her gently and breathed in the warm, familiar scent that always calmed her heart. She did not know that somewhere in the city a phone call was being made. A voice she had not yet heard was speaking her name with quiet, deliberate interest. A name carried to him by the man she had helped. A man she believed was simply old and tired. She had no idea that the shadow who watched her had followed her every move. She did not see the black car idling at the end of her street. She did not know that the world she had stepped into with one simple act of kindness was preparing to swallow her whole. Tonight had felt ordinary to her, just another night of exhaustion and survival. But the path she walked had already begun to twist. Behind her, invisible doors were opening. Ahead of her waited a world she had never touched, one ruled by power and danger and secrets that cut like blades. Until this moment, she had fought only life's daily battles. She had survived far more than most knew. But everything was about to change. And it had begun with a limping old man and a kindness she never expected would matter. The next day arrived too quickly for Giovanna. She barely slept after the long night, her mind drifting in and out of restless dreams. By morning her daughter's cough echoed through their small apartment, a dry sound that made her chest clench each time it rose from the thin blanket. She heated water, prepared tea, and whispered soothing words the way mothers do when they wish they had more than hope to offer. Before leaving for work she counted the cash in her drawer, wishing it would stretch farther. The numbers never changed, no matter how many times she checked. Rent was close. Medication was closer. Both were sharpening their teeth. By the time she walked into the hotel for her evening shift, she had pressed her worries into the deepest corner of her mind. She could not break down here. She needed her job, needed to breathe, needed to move. The polished floor, the scent of citrus cleanser, the distant hum of conversation, all of it felt like a familiar cage she stepped into willingly because it kept her alive. She tied her apron, smoothed her hair, and forced a polite smile as she joined the other attendants. The outdoor dining area glowed beneath suspended lanterns, each flickering like restless fireflies. It looked peaceful enough, but as she worked through her tasks, a subtle heaviness seemed to gather in the air. It began with the sound of footsteps. Slow, synchronized, and entirely out of place among the chatter of guests. The staff sensed it first. Heads lifted. Conversations halted. Someone muttered a tense warning under their breath. A group of men entered through the main archway, dressed in fitted suits that contrasted sharply with the warm atmosphere. Their expressions were unreadable, their movements controlled and deliberate. They did not look like hotel guests. They looked like men accustomed to walking into rooms where people stepped aside without being told. The dining floor fell noticeably quiet. Giovanna paused mid-task, a plate balanced in her hands, as the group split in two and flanked the walkway. Then someone else stepped forward. He was tall, with an air of command that did not need volume or effort. His suit was navy, tailored closely enough to reveal glimpses of intricate tattoos climbing along his wrist and disappearing under the cuff. His presence shifted the air. His eyes swept the room with sharp calculation, and the brief moment they passed over Giovanna made her breath catch. Whispers moved like wind through the staff. "It is him. I cannot believe he is here. Why would he come here?" No one said his name aloud, but their faces revealed enough. Everyone knew who he was. Everyone except Giovanna. The man continued scanning the room until his gaze found the supervisor behind the counter. His voice carried with quiet authority. "I am looking for a staff member," he said. "Her name is Giovanna." The floor seemed to freeze. Even the guests sensed the sudden tension. Some stared openly. Others pretended not to notice but failed miserably. Giovanna felt her heart thud painfully in her chest. There was no reason for a man like him to know her name. No reason for him to be here. No reason for this moment to exist at all. Still, she stepped forward. Slowly. Carefully. "I am Giovanna," she said softly. The man's gaze found hers again, this time with a focus that felt heavy and significant. "My name is Miles Marquez," he said. "I believe you met someone last night." Her confusion must have shown because he added, "My father, Judson Marquez." A quiet gasp rushed through the staff behind her. Someone dropped a utensil. Someone else brushed past her as if hoping to get farther from the table where she stood. Giovanna felt unsteady. Her throat tightened as she remembered the frail man she had helped. The trembling hands. The quiet gratitude. The gentle sadness. She whispered, "He is your father?" "Yes," Miles replied. "And he spoke about you repeatedly. All night." The word struck her so deeply she nearly forgot to breathe. She had not known the old man would remember her once he left. She had not known he mattered to anyone at all. Miles studied her quietly before continuing. "My father rarely talks these days. Rarely eats. Rarely smiles. But last night he would not stop describing your kindness. He said you treated him like he mattered." A weight settled on her shoulders that had nothing to do with fear. It was the strange sense of being seen for something she did not think was extraordinary. "I only helped because he needed help," she said. "Most people would not have," Miles replied. For a moment his voice softened, almost imperceptibly. Then he straightened, pulling something from the pocket of his suit. "My family pays its debts," he said. "And my father believes we owe you." He extended a small black card between two fingers. The gold lettering glimmered beneath the lantern light. Giovanna did not take it. She stared at it as if it were something that might burn her skin. The staff behind her watched with wide eyes. The guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing something unfolding that did not belong in a luxury dining space. "I do not understand," she said quietly. Miles did not lower the card. "I am offering you a job," he said. "Something better than this. Something safer than the path you are walking." Her pulse quickened. "What kind of job?" His answer came gently. "One that would benefit you. And your daughter." Her stomach dropped. She had never mentioned her child. No one at work even knew her name. The knowledge in his eyes created a chill along her arms. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Giovanna forced herself to breathe. "I cannot accept something I do not understand. I have a life here. A routine. I need stability." "I can offer you more than stability," he said. "I can offer you options." She shook her head before she even realized she was doing it. "I appreciate the offer. I truly do. But I cannot accept. I need to remain where I am." Miles studied her for a long moment. Not with frustration or disappointment. More with a kind of curious patience, as though he expected her answer yet still found it interesting. Finally he placed the card gently on the nearby table. "Keep it," he said. "If you need anything, call. My father believes you are someone worth helping. That is enough for me." He gave a subtle nod to his men, and they stepped back as he turned to leave. The room slowly regained movement as his presence withdrew. Giovanna stood frozen for several seconds, staring at the card resting near the wine glass she had set earlier. Her fingertips tingled. Her heart ached with confusion and fragile fear. The supervisor urged her to return to work, but her thoughts drifted in uneasy patterns for the rest of the shift. Every small sound made her jump. Every shadow near the doorway pulled her attention. By the time her shift ended, she understood one thing with absolute clarity. Her life had shifted, even though she had said no. A line had been crossed without her permission, and the card that waited in her apron pocket pulsed like a secret she was not ready to touch. Yet she felt its weight all the same. And with every step she took into the night, unease followed her like a silent companion. The night after Miles Marquez visited the hotel felt unnaturally long. Giovanna walked home with the card pressed deep in her apron pocket, as if burying it there could silence the echo of his voice. She tried to convince herself that nothing had changed, that she could return to her routine, that she could forget the way the entire hotel seemed to vibrate with fear when he entered. But as soon as she opened the apartment door, the illusion dissolved. Her daughter's cough cut through the stale air, harsher now, each breath sounding like it scraped through her small chest. Giovanna hurried to her side, brushing a hand across her warm forehead. "Mommy, it hurts," her daughter whispered. "I know, sweetheart. I am here," Giovanna murmured, forcing her voice steady even as worry clawed at her ribs. She checked the medication bottle and found it depressingly light. There were not enough pills to last another day. She smashed the cap closed, fighting the urge to cry. Morning arrived with unwelcome clarity. She dialed the clinic, hopeful they might grant an extension for payment. They declined. The bill needed to be settled before the prescription could be renewed. She thanked them, hung up, and leaned her head against the peeling wall. The world outside moved without noticing her, but her problems only grew heavier. A sharp knock rattled the apartment door later that afternoon. Her heart sank. She already knew who it was. When she opened it, the landlord stood in the hallway, arms crossed, expression thin with irritation. "Giovanna, I have been patient," he said. "But patient does not pay rent. You are 2 months behind. I need the full amount in 3 days. If not, I will have no choice but to move forward with eviction." 3 days. It might as well have been 3 hours. "I will find a way," she said quietly. "You always say that," he replied before walking off. She closed the door and leaned back against it, feeling the weight of the walls around her. This place was old, cramped, and dim, but it was her daughter's only home. Losing it was not an option. Yet the numbers in her head refused to rearrange themselves into something possible. When evening came, she left for work with a knot in her stomach. Her daughter stayed with a neighbor, but even that arrangement felt fragile, balanced on borrowed goodwill. At the hotel, she tried to focus on her tasks, but the strain of the day pulled at her concentration. Every smile felt forced. Every movement felt heavier than the last. Her co-workers sensed something was wrong but offered only quiet glances, unsure how to help. During the dinner rush, a couple seated near the center table snapped their fingers at her repeatedly. She approached with a polite smile she no longer felt. "We have been waiting forever," the woman complained. "This service is unacceptable." Giovanna had checked their table twice already. Their food was in line with all others. Still, she apologized and rushed to the kitchen, trying to smooth out the situation. When she returned with their order, the man scowled as if the sight of her irritated him. "Too slow," he said, waving her away. The comment stung, but she swallowed it. She needed the tips. She needed everything. By the end of her shift, the bill they left on the table held only a few coins. Not enough to matter. She wiped the table slowly, her throat tight. She could feel herself unraveling. On her break, she slipped to the back hallway and leaned against the wall. Her hands trembled slightly from exhaustion and worry. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe. Her apron felt heavier than usual. She reached into the pocket and pulled out the card Miles had left. The gold lettering caught the dim light of the hallway. It felt unreal, like an object from someone else's life. She stared at it, remembering the subtle firmness in his voice and the quiet intensity in his eyes. A job. A way out. A world she did not want to enter but could no longer outrun. She slid the card between her fingers, torn between fear and desperation. Every instinct warned her to stay away. The Marquez name alone carried enough weight to crush anyone who stepped too close. She had seen how the staff reacted. She had felt the shift in the air when Miles walked across the dining floor. But her daughter needed medication. The rent clock was ticking. Her savings had dried up long before this point. And her world felt smaller with each passing hour. At the end of her shift, she gathered her coat and stepped outside into the cool night breeze. Streetlights flickered overhead. Cars rushed past on the main road. But she barely noticed any of it. Her attention rested on the card resting in her palm. As she walked home, memories of the old man returned in pieces. His fragile frame. His quiet gratitude. The gentle way he held her wrist for a moment, as if anchoring himself to something warm. She had helped him because he needed help. She did not regret that. But she had never imagined it would pull her into this. She climbed the stairs to her apartment with heavy steps. Inside, her daughter slept curled beneath the blanket, breathing softly through the congestion. Giovanna knelt beside her, brushing a curl away from her forehead. "I am trying," she whispered. "I am trying so hard." She sat at the edge of the bed and took the card out one more time. The longer she stared at it, the more she understood a truth she wanted to avoid. She could not keep pretending things would fix themselves. She could not work double shifts forever. She could not protect her daughter with empty pockets and shallow hope. The path she knew was closing, and the only door left standing was the one Miles had opened. Her hands tightened around the card. She did not dial the number yet. Not tonight. Not while she could still tell herself she had one more day. But she stayed awake long into the night, staring at the card under the faint light of the kitchen bulb. She knew, with a quiet ache, that her life could not continue as it was. And the moment she accepted that, she understood something else. Whether she liked it or not, her next step was already waiting for her. Giovanna barely slept. She drifted in and out of shallow dreams, each one filled with the same image of her daughter coughing in the dim glow of the kitchen bulb. By morning the cough had worsened, deeper now, almost rattling. Fear tightened Giovanna's chest as she checked her daughter's temperature. It had climbed higher than the night before. She reached for the last pill in the bottle, feeling defeat close around her. This was all she had left. No refills. No time. No money. Her daughter swallowed the pill with water, but the relief would not last. Giovanna knew it. The clinic knew it. And the truth pressed on her until her hands shook. A half hour later, her daughter's breathing hitched again. She curled over, clutching her stomach, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Mommy, I cannot breathe right." That sentence shattered whatever restraint Giovanna had left. She grabbed her phone. Her fingers hovered for a brief second over the card on the counter. She no longer had room for hesitation or fear. Her child needed help now, and there was only one direction left to turn. She dialed. The line rang once. A calm male voice answered. "State your name." "This is Giovanna." Her voice trembled. "I need to speak to Miles." There was no surprise on the other end, only a steady pause, as if he had been expecting her call. "Stay where you are. Someone will arrive soon." The line clicked. Giovanna lowered the phone slowly, heart pounding. She scooped her daughter into her arms and held her close until she eased back into shallow sleep. For the next 20 minutes, Giovanna sat motionless at the edge of the bed, listening to the soft, labored breaths. A sudden rumble outside broke the silence. She stood and looked through the curtain. A sleek black car waited at the curb, tinted windows reflecting the early light. Her pulse quickened. She kissed her daughter's forehead, whispered a promise to return soon, and stepped outside. The neighbor agreed to watch her child again, unaware of the weight Giovanna carried as she descended the stairs. The back door of the car opened without a word. A man in a dark suit nodded for her to enter. His expression revealed nothing. The interior smelled faintly of leather and something crisp, like fresh air filtered too many times. The door closed behind her. The drive was silent. No music, no conversation, only the steady hum of the engine. The city slipped past the windows in a blur of streetlights and empty sidewalks. Giovanna clutched her hands together, fighting the urge to ask questions she wasn't ready to hear answers to. She tried to steady her breathing, but each mile they traveled pulled her further from the world she knew. When the car finally slowed, she looked up. They approached a large estate surrounded by stone walls and a guarded entrance. Men in black uniforms stood near the gate, watching every movement with trained precision. The car rolled forward after a simple nod from one of them, the iron gates opening in near silence. Giovanna's breath caught. It was more than a house. It was a fortress. The driveway curved past towering trees and landscaped grounds. Lights lined the path, leading up to a residence so large that she couldn't count the windows at first glance. Every detail suggested power that didn't need to be shown off. It simply existed. When the car came to a stop, the driver stepped out and opened her door. Giovanna's legs felt unsteady as she climbed out. Her heart thudded as she took in the structure towering above her. The air felt heavier here, thick with something she couldn't name. The front doors opened. Miles Marquez stepped out. He wore a tailored navy suit, the same quiet confidence surrounding him as before. His tattoos were partly hidden beneath his sleeves, but the edge of one curled over his wrist. His eyes were sharp, observing her closely, as if reading every flicker of doubt or fear. "You came," he said. "I didn't know where else to go," she replied truthfully. He nodded once. "Follow me." Inside, the estate was vast. Wide hallways, polished floors, soft lighting. The scent of expensive wood and clean air filled every corner. She noticed security cameras, men positioned subtly along corridors, and doors she suspected remained locked at all times. It was a world of order and control, built with purpose. Miles walked with steady strides, but he occasionally glanced back at her, as if gauging how overwhelmed she felt. She tried to hide her unease, but her eyes betrayed her. Every room they passed hinted at a life far beyond anything she had known. He led her into a quieter wing of the estate. The atmosphere shifted here. Softer lights. A faint scent of medicine and mint. "This is where he stays," Miles said. He opened a door. Inside, Judson Marquez sat in a reclining chair. His leg rested on a cushioned stool. He looked smaller now, more fragile than she remembered, his breath slightly strained. When he lifted his eyes and saw her, a slow smile spread across his face. Giovanna stepped forward, unsure. Judson's voice came out low but warm. "You came back." She felt her chest tighten. "I am glad to see you again." Miles stood beside his father, remaining silent for a moment before speaking. "He has been asking about you. More than I expected." Judson chuckled softly. "Do not make it sound unusual. The girl has kindness in her eyes." Giovanna lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond. Miles turned to her. "He has been declining steadily. Some days are better than others. Some nights are difficult. And he has not reacted to anyone with this level of comfort in a long time." She listened quietly, absorbing every word. "That night you helped him," Miles continued, "was the first time in years I saw him relax around someone outside the family." He paused. "You made him feel seen." Judson nodded. "She treated me like a man, not a burden." Miles looked at her again, steady and deliberate. "I want to offer you a position here. As his personal caregiver and companion. Someone he can talk to. Someone who can stay by his side on the hard days." Giovanna swallowed. "I do not have special training." "You have patience," Judson said softly. "That is worth more than anything." "And compassion," Miles added. "He needs that more than medical routines." She shifted from foot to foot, torn between fear and the desperate reality waiting outside these walls. She thought of her daughter at home, of the medication she could not afford, of the landlord's ultimatum, of the empty future she had been stumbling through. The choice weighed heavily, but the outcome had already formed in her heart. She lifted her head. "If I take this position, what exactly do you expect from me?" "To care for him," Miles replied. "To keep him company. To make the days he has left easier." Judson smiled faintly. And to speak to me the way you did that night. With gentleness. Giovanna breathed in slowly, then exhaled. There was no path left in her old world. Only closed doors and collapsing ground. But here, even with the danger and unknowns, there was a chance. A dangerous chance, but still a chance. She nodded. I will do it, she said. Miles dipped his head in acknowledgement, while Judson's smile softened into something peaceful. In that quiet room, surrounded by power she had never imagined, Giovanna realized the truth. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. And nothing in her life would ever be the same. Giovanna began her first official morning in the Marquez estate with the feeling that every step she took echoed too loudly. The air held a polished stillness, like the entire mansion breathed on a slower rhythm than the rest of the world. She walked lightly, reminding herself she didn't truly belong here. She was only passing through, only surviving. Nothing more. At least, that's what she told herself. The staff moved with an efficiency that made her feel both invisible and scrutinized. Some offered polite nods. Others barely hid the confusion or suspicion in their eyes. A few whispered as she passed, their glances flicking over her like she was a puzzle piece forced into the wrong box. Still, she kept moving. She had to. If she hesitated, she would think, and thinking invited doubt, regret, fear. She had no room left for any of those. A housekeeper finally led her to Judson Marquez's wing, a quieter section of the mansion lined with dark wood, soft lights, and the faint scent of expensive cologne that clung to everything. Proof that the man inside had once been powerful enough to leave a trail behind him. Judson looked smaller in daylight. He sat in a plush armchair beside a large window, a blanket pulled over his lap. His breathing was shallow but steady, his eyes tracking her as soon as she stepped into the room. And despite the deep grooves of age, those eyes were sharp. Not the sharpness of suspicion, no. More like recognition. Familiarity. You came back, he murmured, his voice a low scrape softened by something like relief. Giovanna nodded, unsure why the warmth in his tone caught her off guard. I said I would. And people still keep their word, he said with a faint chuckle. That's rarer than you'd think. She moved closer, adjusting the blanket around him without thinking. His gratitude was silent but palpable. For several minutes they existed in a gentle quiet, him studying her hands as they worked, her watching the fragile rise and fall of his chest. Then he broke the stillness. You know, his voice drifted, like memory tugged him backward. When I was your age, I thought I had forever. I thought the world waited for me. I thought I could outrun consequences. His gaze lifted to the ceiling. Turns out time is the only thing that does the chasing. Giovanna didn't know whether to respond. She simply sat, letting him lead the moment. Judson sighed, weary. Miles doesn't understand that yet. The mention of the sun carried a heaviness she noticed instantly. Not anger, not bitterness, just distance. A long stretch of misunderstanding that neither had found the courage to cross. Before she could ask anything, a soft knock sounded. The door opened without waiting for permission. Something Giovanna quickly learned was common in this place. Miles stepped in. His presence filled the room instantly, not through volume but through the controlled weight of someone used to assessing threats within seconds. His eyes flicked to Giovanna briefly, unreadable, before settling on his father. How are we feeling today? He asked coolly. Judson grunted. Old. Miles's expression softened only slightly. But awake. For now. Giovanna kept her posture steady, though she could feel Miles observing her from the corner of his vision, like he was measuring her usefulness, her sincerity, her every breath. She tried not to shrink under it. He didn't stay long, just long enough to exchange a few words with Judson, long enough to remind the room who held the reins, long enough for Giovanna to feel the subtle shift in the air when he left. Judson watched the doorway even after his son was gone. He's a good boy, he said eventually, though the conviction wasn't strong. But the world he lives in, it changes people. Giovanna sensed the truth was more complicated than he let on. But she didn't push. She simply listened. That seemed to be what he needed most. As the hours passed, she helped him move from his chair to the adjoining sitting area, prepared his tea exactly the way the nurse instructed, and read to him from a worn leather-bound book he pointed toward with trembling fingers. The more time they spent together, the more she noticed how carefully he watched her. Not in suspicion, but in curiosity, like he was trying to understand the kind of person who would stop for an old man on the street without expecting anything in return. It wasn't long before fragments of his past began slipping into their conversations. Mentions of businesses built and lost, of mistakes made in the shadows of ambition, of a wife he adored but failed to keep close, of children raised in luxury but not tenderness. He never spoke in full stories, only pieces, enough for her to see the cracks beneath the wealth. During a pause, Judson looked at her with startling clarity. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly. "Someone who didn't look at me with fear or expectation. Someone who saw me. The man, not the name." Giovanna's throat tightened. She didn't know why his words reached her the way they did, but they settled deep. Throughout the day, staff came and went. Some showed her quick, polite smiles. Others seemed less welcoming, their eyes following her with thinly veiled judgment. One security guard in particular stared too long, as if trying to memorize her face. She quickly learned that in this estate, being watched was constant. Privacy was a luxury that existed only for those with power. But the strangest thing was how often Miles reappeared. Not always entering the room. Sometimes she only caught a glimpse of him passing the hallway, lingering by a doorway, or pretending to check something on his phone while his attention was clearly elsewhere. He didn't interrupt. He didn't question her. He simply watched, observing the way she interacted with his father, the ease that formed between them. There was no hostility in his gaze. Just calculation, interest, maybe even confusion. Under that gaze, Giovanna grew more aware of every gesture she made. By late afternoon, after hours of caring for Judson, the old man leaned back in his recliner, exhausted but peaceful. The light outside faded into a soft gold, brushing over the room. Judson looked at her with a gentleness that carried weight. "Do you know what you've done today?" he asked. Giovanna blinked. "I don't think I've done much." He shook his head slowly. "You made me feel human again." The words landed softly, but they hit hard. Giovanna swallowed, unsure how to respond. She wasn't accustomed to changing anyone's life, not in any way that mattered. She barely held her own together. But Judson spoke with such sincerity that for the first time since stepping into the Marquez estate, she felt something settle inside her, a sense of purpose. Not the frantic survival she lived by. Something steadier, warmer. As she helped him settle for the evening, she realized something profound. This was no longer just a job. It was a doorway, one she had already stepped through, and there would be no going back. The next several days settled into a rhythm that felt both foreign and strangely natural to Giovanna. Each morning she arrived at the Marquez estate with the quiet determination of someone balancing too many worlds at once. She tended to Judson with gentle efficiency, learned the silent codes of the household staff, and tried to hold her life outside the iron gates together. Especially her child's health, which weighed on her constantly. Whenever she left the estate, she went straight home, checking temperatures, managing medication schedules, stretching money in ways that felt like pulling thread from air. She never stayed long enough to truly rest. She couldn't afford that luxury anymore. But she made sure her child saw her smile every time she walked through the door. That was non-negotiable. Inside the estate, the days were calmer. Until they weren't. Judson grew more comfortable with her presence. He spoke more, not always in long sentences, but with meanings that lingered between words. Sometimes he watched her with a thoughtful expression, like he was studying something he didn't know he'd been missing. Giovanna couldn't explain why, but she felt at ease around him, protective even. One evening, while she was helping him settle after dinner, Judson sighed deeply, his gaze drifting toward the window. "My family used to be loud," he said quietly. "Always arguments, always opinions. I thought noise meant life." His eyes dimmed with memory. "But silence is what grew between us in the end." Giovanna waited, sensing this was not simply nostalgia. "Blood doesn't guarantee closeness," Judson continued. "I made choices that carved distances I never managed to cross back over. Some were about business. Some were about pride. His voice softened to a rasp. And some were about Miles. She looked at him carefully. He cares for you. I can see that. Judson huffed a faint laugh. He does. But caring and trusting, those are not the same. He grew up in a world where caution was taught before affection, where strength meant not showing softness. I failed him there. Giovanna didn't respond, but she understood more than he knew. Walls built for survival had a way of turning into cages. As the days passed, she noticed changes around the estate. Small at first, then impossible to ignore. The guards were more alert. Additional staff rotated in and out. Conversations hushed the moment she approached. And most unsettling of all, the nights felt different. She heard it the first time when she was leaving late in the evening. A distant shuffle near the east corridor, followed by hushed, urgent voices. A guard hurried past her without a word, his hand already on his radio. The air held a tension she couldn't quite name. The next morning, Miles appeared in Judson's room earlier than usual. He spoke briskly with the head of security at the doorway. Giovanna caught only fragments: perimeter, breach, unconfirmed entry, but enough to understand something had happened. When Miles finally stepped inside, his expression was composed, but something in his eyes betrayed pressure beneath the surface. "Is everything all right?" Giovanna asked quietly. Miles paused, as if weighing how much to reveal. "There was an incident last night. Nothing that concerns you." His tone was firm, final. Yet later, as she assisted Judson with his medication, Miles lingered near the window, arms crossed, gaze distant. Judson narrowed his eyes. "They're getting closer, aren't they?" It wasn't truly a question. Miles didn't answer, but the silence served as confirmation. That was the first moment Giovanna realized the danger she sensed. It wasn't imagined. It was real, and it crept close to the heart of this family. Miles became more present after that. Not intrusive, but watchful. Protective in ways that surprised her. Sometimes he appeared beside her without warning, asking if she needed anything, if she was comfortable, if she had eaten. Small gestures, but they felt oddly intimate coming from a man who wore control like armor. Once, when she fumbled with the heavy door to the greenhouse patio, Miles appeared behind her, silently opening it. Their eyes met briefly. There was something unguarded in his expression, something almost soft, before he straightened and stepped back. She didn't know what to make of him. The staff seemed unsure how to treat her now. Some warmed to her presence. Others remained stiff and wary. A few exchanged glances she didn't like. Glances that said she doesn't belong here, or worse, she's a threat we don't understand. One afternoon, while walking down one of the quieter corridors, Giovanna heard two voices just around the corner. "She shouldn't be here," one hissed. "What do you want me to do about it?" "She's new. No background check, no clearance. And Miles is letting her in every day." "You know why?" "No, I don't. And that's what scares me." Giovanna stepped back before they saw her, her pulse hammering. So it wasn't just the shadows outside the estate that posed danger. There were doubts inside too. Later that evening, she found Miles in the hallway outside Judson's room, speaking sharply to a guard. "I want security doubled," he said. "No exceptions. And no one gets inside without my approval. No one." The guard nodded and hurried off. Giovanna approached slowly. "Is something wrong?" Miles studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Just precaution. Because of what happened last night?" He didn't deny it. "Judson is vulnerable. And people know that. I'm not taking chances." There was something else in his gaze now, something directed at her specifically. Worry. Or warning. "Am I safe here?" she asked before she could stop herself. Miles's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I'll make sure of it." The promise felt heavy, too heavy to dismiss. But even with Miles's assurance, the unease lingered. The mansion's grandeur suddenly felt like a gilded trap, beautiful, secluded, protected, and full of secrets. That night, as Giovanna packed her bag to leave, She sensed eyes on her, a prickling on the back of her neck. She turned, but the hallway behind her was empty. Still, the feeling followed her all the way to the main entrance. When she stepped outside, the guard who usually escorted her to the gate didn't appear. Instead, another man stood there, someone she hadn't seen before. His stare was cold. Too cold. He didn't speak when she approached, just watched her with a slow, assessing look that sent chills up her spine. Giovanna walked past him quickly, her heart beating too fast. By the time she reached the gate, she knew, without a doubt, that someone in the estate didn't want her there. And whoever it was, they were watching. Giovanna returned to the estate the next morning with a knot in her stomach. The feeling from the night before hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown heavier, pressing against her ribs as she walked through the main doors. Something had shifted inside these walls, and she could feel it even before she reached Judson's room. Two staff members abruptly stopped talking when she passed. A guard she normally nodded to stared at her as if evaluating whether she had a right to be there. She ignored it, but unease clung to her steps. When she entered Judson's room, he looked up immediately, sharper than usual. "You look troubled," he said. "I'm fine." It was a lie she didn't have energy to dress up. Judson gestured toward a chair. "Sit. Something's wrong." She hesitated, then exhaled and lowered herself into the chair. "I think someone here wants me gone." Judson's eyes narrowed. "What happened?" "Strange behavior. Someone watching me last night. And this morning the staff is acting differently." She paused. "I feel like they're being told something, or assuming something." Judson leaned back, his tired face tightening with irritation. "Let me guess. Someone went to Miles." Giovanna's heart skipped. "About me?" Judson nodded once. "People here like to whisper. And when they whisper too loudly, they try to make their problems sound like warnings." Before she could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Miles stepped inside, his expression unreadable. "Miles," Judson said, his tone firm. "Tell her." Miles looked at Giovanna. "There was a report filed this morning." Her breath caught. "Someone claimed you were asking questions about security, about family operations, that you were trying to access areas you weren't authorized to be in." Giovanna stared at him, stunned. "That's not true." Miles studied her face, searching for something. Fear, guilt, maybe evasion. He found none. But he didn't speak. Judson gripped the arm of his chair. "She's not a threat. If you had eyes in your head this morning, you'd see the girl is terrified, not manipulative." Giovanna swallowed, shaken by how fiercely he spoke. Miles shifted slightly. "I didn't accuse her. I confronted the people involved. Their story fell apart in seconds." "Then why tell her now?" Judson pressed. "Because she deserves to know." Miles turned to her fully. "Someone is trying to push you out. Maybe because you're new, maybe because they misunderstand your presence, maybe because they resent how much time you spend with him." Judson gave a small, satisfied grunt at the acknowledgement. Giovanna folded her hands in her lap. "What happens now?" Miles paused. "I'll handle it." Judson cut in sharply. "And you'll leave her out of whatever nonsense is brewing." Giovanna felt the weight of both their gazes. Something had shifted again, subtly but undeniably. Later that afternoon, as she prepared tea for Judson, her phone buzzed. She frowned when she saw the caller ID. Her ex. She stepped into a quiet hallway to answer. "What do you want?" she asked, exhausted before the conversation even began. His voice came through cold. "I want my daughter. You can't take care of her. Not now. Not in your situation." "My situation?" Her pulse spiked. "I know you're working for some dangerous people," he said. "My cousin saw the car picking you up. Saw where you were dropped off. I'm done letting you drag her into whatever mess you got yourself into. If you don't let me take her for the week, I'll go to authorities." Giovanna pressed a hand to her forehead. "You don't care about custody. You want control." "You'll give her to me," he said, or someone else will force the issue." He hung up before she could reply. The hallway spun for a moment, fear and fury mixing like oil and flame. She didn't notice Miles until he spoke behind her. "You're shaking. What happened?" She turned, startled. "Nothing you need to worry about." Miles stepped closer, his tone low. "Someone threatening you?" Giovanna hesitated. Then the truth spilled out. "My ex wants custody. He thinks I'm unsafe here. He thinks the estate is unsafe." Miles's eyes darkened. "Your child is not leaving with a man who uses threats. I'll make sure of that." She blinked, stunned. "Why? Why would you get involved?" "Because you work for us," Miles said simply. "And because Judson trusts you. That alone means protection." But something in his voice suggested it was more than that. Something he wasn't ready to admit. Giovanna wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or frightened. That night, the estate fell under a deeper tension than before. Guards moved with urgency. Curtains were drawn in the hallways. The quiet hum of routine had shifted into something harder. Giovanna was helping Judson settle when loud voices echoed from outside the door. A guard rushed in. "Sir, we need to move you." Judson stiffened. "What happened?" "Security breach on the west side. Too close to the residence." Before Giovanna could react, Miles entered with 2 guards behind him. "Get Judson to the safe room," Miles ordered. "Now!" Giovanna moved to help, but one guard stepped in front of her. "You should stay back." Miles cut him off. "She comes. She stays with him." Judson gave a small approving nod. The guards led them quickly through a side hallway Giovanna hadn't seen before. The walls were thicker, reinforced. She could hear the faint sound of shouting outside, then the sharp click of weapons being drawn. Her pulse pounded. This was no rumor, no whispered warning. This was danger, undeniable and close. They reached a secure room deep inside the estate. As the door shut, muffling the rest of the commotion, Giovanna tried to steady her breathing. Judson sat heavily in a chair. "This is the cost," he muttered. "This is what I never wanted Miles to inherit." Giovanna sank beside him, shaken. "Who are these people? Why are they after you?" Judson didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked toward the door where Miles now stood, speaking quietly with a guard on his radio. Miles finally stepped inside, locking the door behind him. "It's handled." The intruders didn't get far. "What do they want?" Giovanna asked, voice trembling despite her effort to stay calm. Miles studied her carefully. "Old enemies. Men who think hurting us will bring back power they lost years ago. They target weakness, vulnerability. That means Judson." He paused, eyes flicking to her. "And anyone close to him." The realization struck her like a blow. Her kindness, simple, human, instinctive, had tied her to something far bigger, far darker than she ever understood. Judson turned his head toward her, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm sorry, child. You didn't ask for any of this. But you gave an old man warmth when no one else looked at him." Miles added quietly, "And that act made you part of our world, whether you wanted it or not." Giovanna's breath stilled. In that moment, surrounded by steel walls, guarded by armed men, with danger pressing from all sides, she understood the truth. Her life would never return to what it was before that night at the hotel. And nothing about what came next would be simple again. The alarms had barely faded before the estate settled into an uneasy quiet. Giovanna barely slept that night, sitting beside Judson in the reinforced room until security finally declared the grounds secure again. When she walked him back to his bedroom, she noticed how much slower he moved. His hand trembled more than usual when she helped him onto the bed. By morning, the change in him was impossible to ignore. Judson's breathing grew shallow, each inhale a strain. His eyes, usually sharp behind the fatigue, had gone dull and unfocused. When Giovanna placed a hand on his shoulder, he looked up at her with a kind of hazy recognition. "I'm still here," she whispered. He nodded weakly. The private doctor arrived within an hour, summoned by Miles before the sun rose. Giovanna stood at the corner of the room, arms wrapped around herself as the doctor examined Judson. "How bad?" Miles asked quietly. The doctor hesitated. "His condition has deteriorated faster than expected. His heart is struggling. Stress will make it worse." Miles's jaw tightened. "Is he stable?" "For now," the doctor said. "But he needs rest and as little agitation as possible." When the doctor left, Miles remained at the doorway for a long moment. His expression was tight, controlled, but beneath it Giovanna saw something she had never noticed so clearly. Fear. He had built a life on being untouchable. Yet here, watching his father fade, he looked like someone losing the one battle he could not prepare for. Giovanna approached him softly. "He needs calm," she said. "I'll stay with him." Miles nodded, hesitating before speaking. "He trusts you more than anyone in this house." Something in his voice cracked on the last word. He didn't wait for a response. He left before she could offer one. Throughout the day, Giovanna tended to Judson with a gentleness that steadied the tense atmosphere around them. She adjusted his blankets, helped him drink water, read aloud when he could keep his eyes open. Sometimes he drifted off mid-sentence, only to wake minutes later confused and apologizing. "You don't owe me apologies," she murmured each time. His frail hand tightened over hers. "You make this less lonely." She swallowed hard. "You're not alone." Outside the room, guards moved with restless urgency. Radios crackled constantly. The estate felt on edge, as if the walls themselves braced for something coming. By evening, Giovanna's nerves were raw. She stepped out for a moment to refill Judson's water, and nearly collided with Miles in the hallway. He steadied her with a hand on her arm. "You all right?" The unexpected contact sent a jolt through her, but she nodded. "Just tired." "He hasn't been this weak before." Miles studied her face, something conflicted flickering in his eyes. "You shouldn't carry all of this on your own." "You're carrying it too," she said quietly. His jaw worked. He didn't deny it. For a moment they stood there, the tension between them thick with unspoken vulnerability. But the silence shattered when a guard sprinted down the corridor. "Sir, we have movement on the north perimeter. Multiple figures." Miles's expression hardened instantly. "Lock down the residential wing. Move Judson to the lower quarters. Now." Giovanna's pulse surged. "Is it another attack?" Miles didn't answer. His eyes told her enough. The relocation happened fast. Guards surrounded them, ushering Giovanna and Judson toward a secured passage beneath the estate. The dim lights flickered overhead as distant rumbling echoed through the walls. Judson clutched Giovanna's hand. "What's happening?" "Everything's fine," she said, though her voice shook. "We're moving somewhere safer." He squeezed her fingers weakly. "I'm not scared for myself. I worry for him." Giovanna didn't understand until he continued. "You should know something," Judson said, breath trembling. "Miles wasn't meant to inherit any of this. He became what I forced him to be." Giovanna glanced at him, startled. "What do you mean?" Judson closed his eyes, gathering strength. "His childhood ended too early. I asked him to protect what I built. He learned hard lessons to keep this family alive. Every choice he made because of me." Giovanna's throat tightened. She thought of Miles's fierceness, his guarded nature, his occasional flashes of vulnerability. "He carries more regret than he admits," Judson whispered. "He loved someone once. Lost her because of this life. He never forgave himself. Or me." Giovanna listened, stunned. It was a truth she hadn't expected, a piece of Miles she could never have guessed. Before she could respond, the lights flickered again. Louder crashes sounded above them. Guards moved faster, hands on weapons. Miles met them at the end of the passage. "Move him to the bunker," he ordered. When he looked at Judson, something fragile crossed his expression. "Stay with him," he told Giovanna. "Don't leave his side." She nodded, heart hammering. As they reached the fortified room deep beneath the estate, Giovanna felt the full weight of the danger surrounding them. This wasn't a simple breach. Whoever was coming had grown more desperate, more reckless. Inside the bunker, the air felt thick and cold. Judson's breaths grew shallow again. Giovanna helped him settle on the cot, but the effort seemed to drain what little strength he had left. Miles stood at the doorway, speaking urgently into a radio. "Do not let them past the southern hall. Hold position until reinforcements arrive." A sudden explosion rocked the ground beneath them. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Judson gasped in alarm. Giovanna reached for him. "It's all right. I'm here. You're safe." Judson clutched her wrist. "Promise me something." She leaned closer. "What is it?" "Stay close to him. He hides behind walls he no longer needs. You can break some of them." Her breath caught. "Judson, please. Don't talk like this." He smiled faintly. "I know when my time is running short." Before she could argue, a violent tremor shook the bunker. Miles rushed to Judson's side, eyes blazing with fear. "They're closer than we thought," he said. "We need to move him again." But Judson didn't respond. His eyes drooped, unfocused. His chest rose once, then again, but struggled for the next breath. "Judson!" Giovanna whispered, panic tightening her voice. Miles dropped to his knees beside the cot. "Dad, stay with me." Judson blinked slowly, as if caught between worlds. Giovanna grabbed his hand, holding it firmly. His breathing stuttered, and then faltered. "No," Miles said, voice cracking. "Not now. Not like this." Giovanna felt Judson's fingers slip from hers. He slumped back against the pillow, chest still, eyes half closed. Guards rushed in at the sound of Miles's shout, but Giovanna barely heard them. She stared at Judson's motionless form, heart sinking. The last thread tying Miles to the softer part of his past had snapped, and the attackers outside had no idea what storm they had just unleashed. Judson's collapse brought the world to a standstill. The alarms, the hurried footsteps, the shouts, it all blurred into a single ringing sound in Giovanna's ears as the medical team rushed him down the hall. She remained close, her hand never fully leaving his until someone gently guided her aside so they could work. Even then, she hovered in the doorway, breath shallow, heart pounding. The safe house felt impossibly quiet after the chaos. Miles paced the length of the room like a man holding back a storm inside his chest. He kept trying to mask it, to hold the same controlled expression he always did, but the cracks showed. Tightened jaw, shaking hands, breath that broke each time the door to Judson's room opened and closed. Hours passed before the doctor finally emerged. His expression carried the weight of what both of them already feared. "It's time," he said softly. Giovanna stepped inside first. Judson rested in the bed, fragile but peaceful, his breath slow and uneven. The room was dim, the only light coming from a small lamp beside him. She approached slowly, lowering herself into the chair she had occupied so many nights before. His eyes fluttered open, and a faint smile curved his lips. "There you are," he whispered. "I'm here," she replied, taking his hand gently. He exhaled shakily, his gaze drifting around the room before settling back on her. "Tell Miles not to carry what isn't his anymore." Giovanna swallowed, nodding, though she wasn't sure she understood. Judson's fingers tightened weakly around hers. "And you, thank you for making these last days feel like they belong to me. Not the family. Not the legacy. Me." A tear escaped before she could stop it. He smiled again, soft, content, unburdened, and then his eyes slowly closed. His chest rose once more, and did not rise again. Giovanna lowered her head, letting silence wrap around them like a final blanket. When she finally stood and stepped outside, Miles looked at her, not asking, not pleading, not demanding. Just searching. She shook her head. His eyes shut, pain carving a deep line down the center of his face. But he didn't shout. He didn't break anything. He simply sat down, elbows on his knees, and let the weight crush him quietly. Giovanna sat beside him, not speaking, just being there, steady, present, real. The next days were heavy yet strangely calm. Security teams confirmed that the attackers had been found and neutralized. The threat that had hovered over the family finally dissolved. The estate was cleared, reinforced, and declared safe, though it no longer felt like the place she had first walked into. Something had shifted. Someone was missing, and his absence echoed through every hallway. Miles handled the funeral arrangements with a mechanical precision that made Giovanna ache for him. He gave orders, signed papers, coordinated security, anything to keep his hands busy. But at night, when the estate finally grew quiet, he would retreat to Judson's study and stay there until dawn. Giovanna never intruded, but she often stayed nearby, just in case the silence became too much for him to carry alone. After the burial, the estate entered a strange, suspended calm. Staffs walked softer. Guards kept their distance. Even the air felt different. One afternoon, Miles knocked on Giovanna's door not with authority, but with hesitation. "I want to talk," he said softly. She stepped aside, letting him enter. He glanced around, as though unsure where to stand, before finally settling near the window. "My father trusted you," he began. "More than anyone. More than me, sometimes." Giovanna shook her head. "He loved you. He worried about you every day." Miles's jaw flexed, and he looked away. "He told me once that kindness is a form of courage. I didn't understand it then. I'm starting to." She let the silence hold for a moment before speaking. Judson didn't see kindness as weakness. That's why he valued it so much. Miles exhaled slowly. "I owe you more than I can put into words. You helped him leave this world peacefully. And you kept him alive far longer than doctors believed possible." His gaze softened. "I want to help you now. You and your child." Giovanna opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a hand gently. "This isn't charity. This is gratitude. And respect." He met her eyes fully. "Let me help you rebuild your life. A stable home. Secure income. Whatever you need." Her throat tightened, overwhelmed not by the offer but by the sincerity behind it. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything today," Miles replied. "Just know the offer stands. Always." Over the next weeks, her life slowly pieced itself back together. Her child received proper medical care, the best she had ever been able to afford. They moved into a safe, comfortable apartment that didn't threaten eviction every month. Miles arranged a long-term position for her, one that allowed flexibility, security, and a sense of purpose. But beyond the practical help, there was something gentler growing in the spaces between them. Unspoken, unrushed. A warmth that flickered in the way Miles looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, and in the way her chest tightened when she saw him struggling to move on without Judson. They didn't name it. Not yet. But it was there. One late afternoon, after visiting the cemetery with her child, Giovanna stood outside the estate gates. The path leading away from the Marquez world stretched long and open before her, sunlight catching the trees in a soft, golden glow. Her child tugged at her hand. "Mommy, are we going home?" She looked down, smiling softly. "Yes, we are." As they walked forward, she glanced once more at the estate behind her, not with fear, and not with the desperation of the day she'd first been driven there, but with gratitude. One simple moment of kindness had changed everything. It had saved a man's final days, reshaped her future, and opened doors she never imagined she'd walk through. The world ahead felt uncertain, but no longer frightening. She wasn't alone anymore. Hand in hand with her child, Giovanna stepped into the light of a new beginning, stronger, steadier, and forever changed by the compassion that had started it all.